Good evening and welcome to the March 18th, 2025 regular meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission. We are calling this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Item number 2, oh wait, here we go. There we go. It's official. Item 2, roll call. Can the recording secretary please conduct the roll call?
Commissioner Alpert,
Here.
Commissioner Avila,
Here.
Commissioner Wallace,
I'm here.
Vice Chair Curtis,
Present.
and Chair Kuznick.
I'm here. Item 3, the Pledge of Allegiance. If you will join me in standing for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 4, public comments or written communication. Pardon me. At this time, members of the public may address the Planning Commission on any item not already included in tonight's agenda. If you would like to speak, please fill out a speaker card located in the back of the room and submit it to the recording secretary. We will not be taking any public comment via Zoom. Do we have any communication or any comment that is not on the agenda?
No, I did not receive any written communication for this item.
Okay. I'm seeing one come towards you. We'll see if this is for an agendized item or not.
It's not for this item.
No? Okay. All right. So
No speaker cards for this item.
no speaker for, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, moving on to item 5, additions and revisions. I believe there are none. I've not seen any, correct? Okay, excellent. Item 6, the consent calendar. 6.1, minutes of the Planning Commission regular meeting, March 4th of 2024. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes and the consent calendar?
I move to accept the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting from March 4th, 2025.
Okay. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Okay, very good. The vote is 5-0. The motion passes. We have accepted the minutes of March 4th. Okay. Moving on to item number 7, continued items after closing a public hearing. There are none. Item 8, continued items. Open the public hearing. Item 8.1, public hearing. The general plan amendment for downtown mixed use north, the DMUN, site-wide floor area ratio FAR amendment, GPA 2024-0001, zoning ordinance text amendment for DMU North site-wise FAR amendment, TA 2024-0003, and the environmental review for the proposed GPA and TA, and is the ENVR 2025-0001. And we have Ms. Yee to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening. Thank you for reading those application numbers out for us. This evening, we're here to have our continued public hearing on these 3 applications in front of you. Trying to forward the slides here. Oh, there it is. Okay. So again, purpose of this meeting is to consider the proposed amendment to the general plan and zoning ordinance to reduce the DMU North minimum site-wide floor area ratio from the current standard of 1.25 minimum to a 0.5 minimum. Tonight's hearing is the third in a series of our public hearings on general plan amendments. It provides an opportunity for the commission to continue the review of the proposed amendments and then close the public hearing if you feel appropriate, and we've attached Resolution 03-25 for your consideration this evening. Now, you've seen this map before, but just to reorient ourselves with the DMU North within the city's core, 205-acre area. As a continuation from our last meeting on March 4th, the commission had requested that staff provide some additional analysis on increasing the minimum DMU North site-wide FAR to potentially a higher minimum standard. And we were tasked with reviewing what a minimum FAR of 0.7 or 0.75 would look like. And so as part of our analysis, staff identified the minimum building square footage needed to achieve each of those respective FARs, and then provided an estimated minimum number of dwelling units that that square footage would yield. We took data from the existing parcels, looked at what the current FARs are, the existing building square footage is, and then replicated that with what 0.5 would look like, 0.7 and then 0.75. So you'll see in the attached table, there are columns that identify the green, yellow, and orange columns that have the minimum building square footages and the associated estimated dwelling units with those minimum site-wide FARs and how those would look like based on a 0.5, 0.7, and 0.75. The table does show an increase in approximately 29% and 30% more building square footage as you increase the FAR from 0.5 to 0.7 and 0.75 respectively. And ultimately, the data shows you that while requiring more square footage, i.e. more dwelling units, through a higher minimum site-wide FAR, that could potentially help achieve the city's RHNA faster. It also has the possibility to deter redevelopment if sites are not able to meet this higher development standard and market conditions. Not all of the sites are housing opportunity sites in the DMU North, and some of them we foresee to continue on as commercial. So potentially redevelopment in some of those commercial properties would not be able to utilize state density bonus and would potentially not be able to redevelop with that higher FAR. So that could impact the ability for those parcels to redevelop. By creating a wider FAR range for a site using a base FAR of 0.5, this has the potential to encourage more redevelopment due to a lower barrier to develop and a consideration of a wider range of market trends. And then in the attached staff report, you'll find the slide here showing the FAR ratio analysis. I did want to point out a couple of things on here. We took all of the parcels in the DMU North. Some of them were combined, so you may have, for example, 3 parcels in Bishop Ranch 15, but we combine them all as one site, and so they're represented as one site address and then acreage associated with that particular parcel. Those are listed on this table. The top 4 parcels that are on this list, those are either approved or currently proposed applications that the city has received, and so we already have associated FARs with those projects. You'll find those at the far right on the in the gray columns that show what the project was approved with or proposed with those FARs and the associated building square footage and the dwelling units per acres based on those 4 either approved or currently proposed projects. And then the list continues on with applications that, parcels that remaining in the DMU North, and then some, again, some assumptions using the 0.5, 0.7, and 0.75. And so one thing I did want to point out, those first 2 column, the green column, the DMU North, where it identifies the estimated dwelling units with minimum 0.5 FAR. In your original packet, there was a number of 485 units and then 76 units in those columns. It's been corrected to 437. They were taking the formula from the wrong column, but ultimately it's a difference of about 48 units less in the Bishop Ranch 8, and then 46 more units potentially in Bishop Ranch 12. So the rest of the cells are correct, but just wanted to point that out is that in the Bishop Ranch 8 and Bishop Ranch 12 columns, where the green cells are identified dwelling units, there's just a correction there for the number of units, but building square footage is still the same. Just the yield for estimated dwelling units is updated in this table. So that just leads us to just the final slide this evening. The conclusions that we've come to over the last 3 public hearings. Reducing the minimum site-wide FAR to 0.5 will continue to support the city's general plan policies and housing goals. We do not see it as an impact to the certification of our housing element. Setting a new minimum site-wide FAR range doesn't prevent redevelopment at the intensity that the general plan envisioned. It does give more design flexibility to reduce building mass and has the potential to encourage more redevelopment. So this evening, we're here to take some additional public testimony, close the public hearing if appropriate, and then discuss and deliberate basically the fundamental question: should the city reduce the minimum site-wide FAR in the DMU North from 1.25 to 0.5? So following this evening's recommendation from the commission, staff will schedule subsequent council meetings for the council to take up this request. So that concludes my presentation this evening. The applicant does have a quick PowerPoint as well. I can pull that up if you'd like to have them present first.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Please.
I appreciate that. Good evening, Chair Kuznick and Planning Commissioners. On behalf of Sunset Development, I am Stephanie Hill, and we appreciate the opportunity to continue the discussion regarding the request to reduce the DMU North site-wide minimum FAR this evening. Over the past month and a half, we have discussed the concepts of FAR and density and the thresholds in the DMU North zone. The dwelling unit per acre range is 20 to 60 units per acre, while the FAR range is 1.25 to 2.75. The two metrics do not align for 100% residential developments. Due to this inconsistency, BR7 and BR11 in DMU North relied upon the state density bonus to decrease the minimum site-wide FAR as part of their approval process. At our most recent meeting, we were asked about the rationale for the 0.5 site-wide minimum FAR. And we had 2 different data points that we looked to. The first being city center mixed use directly to the south of DMU North in the general plan is defined as having a maximum site-wide FAR of 0.7 with a density range of 22 to 50 units per acre. Setting a minimum site-wide FAR for DMU North higher than the maximum FAR for a comparable density range seems inconsistent. Second, as outlined in the staff report, multiple existing properties within DMU North have an FAR below 0.5. Setting a higher FAR threshold limits the development options for these properties, particularly the horizontal mixed-use execution, which blends metrics across existing and new developments. FAR is a simple calculation. It is the building area divided by the gross acreage. FAR does not consider wider setbacks to accommodate meandering sidewalks, landscaped buffers, internal circulation like private roads, or paseos, parks, and gathering spaces. These elements are vital to the city and community in fostering a desirable pedestrian-oriented environment, and have consistently been emphasized throughout the design process for BR7 and BR11, as shown with the BR7 graphics. As a note, the BR8 conceptual plan provided in public comment is no longer being pursued, and an alternate site plan is in process. For reference, the 1.25 site-wide FAR in the materials is calculated on net lot area, not gross. The FAR for the BR8 concept plan on gross area is closer to 0.7 FAR as opposed to the 1.25, which has been circulated in materials. We have been describing our vision for Bishop Branch for many years, and it's a vision that we believe is shared by the city's leaders and residents. And we have frequently referred to this land use diagram, which depicts our development strategy. Our intentions are to deliver housing on as fast a timeline as practical and reasonable, and to deliver affordable housing in the most impactful way that we can. Within a community, it is important to support a variety of housing types, including rental and ownership opportunities that create a fabric rather than just delivering one building type and architecture. Blending the best approaches for rental, ownership, and affordable housing creates a vibrant, multi-generational, and socioeconomically diverse community. It offers flexible options for people at different life stages and with varying financial situations, from young professionals and families to retirees. We propose to add higher intensity residential developments at the city core, generally near Bollinger Canyon and Camino Ramon, where they are proximate to existing and planned retail, which will improve the viability of those projects and that will be an important sales tax driver for the city. We propose to balance this higher intensity development with homes like City Village under construction and the homes approved for Bishop Branch 7 and Bishop Branch 11. While state density bonus is a tool for Bishop Branch 7 and Bishop Branch 11 as individual developments to navigate the inconsistency between density and FAR, it limits implementing a larger vision to deliver market rate and affordable housing. State density bonus requires the provision of on-site affordable housing to receive concessions and waivers. The state density bonus land donation provision, whether through intention or drafting error, does not allow for waivers and/or concessions, but it does allow for increased density. If the DMU North site-wide minimum FAR is reduced, the city's land dedication alternative in the inclusionary housing ordinance is an option for implementing affordable housing. To utilize this ordinance, the projects would have to conform with city code, which is why we are requesting the FAR reduction. In the letter dated February 25th to the Planning Commission and City Council, Sunset outlined our larger strategy to implement a housing strategy that would deliver over 300 affordable homes to the community at a deeper level of affordability. There are multiple steps and approvals to implement the Bishop Branch affordable proposal. The request in front of the Planning Commission tonight is whether you support the reduction in the DMU North site-wide minimum FAR, which is the first step in that process. I appreciate any comments or questions. I'm available.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we probably have run through the gamut of clarifying questions. So I'm just going to go ahead and move to public comment.
Excuse me,
Yes.
when you said we've run through the gamut of clarifying questions, we haven't even asked any questions. Now, I'm okay to have public comment, but I do have questions of staff.
No, I understand. And if it's
Okay.
with your concession here, I'd like to do the public comment first.
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any speaker cards?
Yes.
Excellent.
First, I wanted to mention that we received written communication from Commissioner Wallace and Kevin Burke with East Bay for Everyone. And my first speaker card is for Jim Blickenstaff.
Okay. Welcome.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Jim Blickenstaff. Following up the last meeting with something I became aware of. And it, from my history in the city, it was some concern to me. I noticed on further review of the changes in the FARs and other issues that demonstrated in the packet was a 8-story building. The justification for this was parking on the first floor and then a 7-story building, not on the ground, but on the parking part. And it seemed to me the rendition demonstrated that that first floor was even higher than maybe your standard first floor would be. So the question came up immediately, and I didn't really find an answer that I needed in the packet. So I'm kind of bringing it to your attention. Are we in effect increasing the height limit with this general plan amendment, all these things? In the process, are we increasing the height limit by at least 1 story devoted to parking? And maybe more than that, you know, maybe that's the justification to make maximum use of the land. And that would be a troubling issue because height limits are a sensitive subject to the people. And I think it needs a separate hearing if it is true. If it's not true, I'm just wasting time here. But if it is true, we need to have that as a separate issue, separate item, and then discuss it as the wish by the city to increase their height limit from 85 feet to maybe 97 feet, maybe 112 feet, whatever the parking garage demands. And that's a whole different visual in terms of the shadow impacts and the height and all that stuff. So that's the issue that cropped up. And I didn't really find an adequate answer in the packet as to that. They do mention 85 feet, but that could be dedicated to a slightly different subject. So in terms of tonight, if you're entertaining the idea of approving this, I would say a caveat would be a clarification, if that's the right word, of what the height limit is. And in the process, if it's gone up 1 or 2 stories or whatever it may be, that would be something you'd want to look at separately because that could be growth inducing and lead to other issues that complicate the matter. Other than that, some of the ideas here are good, and I kind of appreciate the effort being made, but I don't want to have increasing height limit significantly be part of that. And the other issue very quickly is I think it's within the Orchards area. It's the iconic building, Chevron building, that has that brick frontage and the tower that's quite unique. And it's unique to San Ramon. You know, people have noticed it as a landmark. And is that to be destroyed to be replaced by 7-story apartment complexes? Because that would be a shame. I think you can use it in ways that are kind of creative and make it serviceable for other issues. But that's another issue that I think we don't want to automatically demolish that building because it has a bit of history and recognition in the community. So that was the other issue, but I thought I'd better at least bring that to your attention because I did see they are asking if you want to approve this tonight, and there's a couple of caveats in there I just wanted to make sure you were aware of.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Chirag Katrani.
Hello, commissioners and staff. So I had about this general plan update. I went through the notes of Eric Wallace as well as I looked at the plan which Bishop Ranch Sunset Development has presented. In all the plans, if you aggregate it, still coming to the 1.25 FAR. If you put the DMU North together, correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't able to find that out clearly. It wasn't very clear as well. And the options which they mentioned was given is like, it's not a written plan, like if the 8-story building is going to be there or not, if there and when. So I think city should reject this change in FAR, as well as in your mention, you mentioned that it would be like $1 million, less than $1 million saving on this particular development plan, which is coming up, BR11. But if you change the DMU all north, it's like it could change none of the things could be guaranteed because the general plan was made with the purpose to keep the downtown intensity to be higher. So I would like to put that my opposition on this item.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg Carr.
Greg Carr, San Ramon resident. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Because I can't hear a lot of the folks that preceded me. So you'll be able to hear me. comment for the chair, Gene Kuznick. It would be helpful for the audience, albeit highly minuscule, if what Eric Wallace suggested about questions could be done prior to the public comment.
Okay.
It wouldn't have to be in depth, but it would be to have the questions that the commissioners have in their heads at that time, ask those questions of staff and the applicant so that the audience could hear the answers. Because the information provided, tonight is as small as the audience here tonight. It's not enough for people who come here the first time, as I have. Admittedly, I have not come for the first and second rounds. Anyway, 0.5, 0.7, 0.75, 1.25, hell, let's make it 5, let's maximize things. That's troubling because there's a character change that takes place in the city. If a higher FAR is to be approved, is there any rider to the approval for the development that would guarantee that the open area created by the higher FAR and buildings pushing the height limitation envelope, would there be any guarantee that those open areas are going to be kept open areas? That's a real problem because, memories fade and there's always demand for more space. So where are you going to put the parking if you've got a big FAR, 1.25, 1.75, whatever? Is that going to go under the building, as in below grade? Is that going to go first and second story? If that happens, what happens to the height limitation? Because if you put it above ground, that's robbing space that you can sell and convert into affordable housing. Lastly, in my last 10 seconds, I continue to just marvel at how city governments are hornswoggled by developers, just like the company that is represented by this young woman behind me, to add more, do this, and yet you never really see a lot of affordable housing for people who really need affordable housing. It doesn't exist. It's not in their lexicon, and the entire thing done by increasing FARs is a ruse to get more units so they can make more money, maximize their land. All that's fine, but still the question is begged, where is the affordable housing for the people who provide services to this community? I sure as hell don't see it. I haven't seen it in 37 years I've been around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr.
I have no other speaker cards.
Okay. So is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll move to close the public hearing.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. You want to do this by roll call? Or are we going to digitally vote? Okay, we got this. Commissioner Avila, did you push? There we go. Thank you. There we go. Okay. Okay, so that motion has passed 5-0. Thank you. All right. So at this point, we will ask for clarifying questions. My apologies to you, Mr. Carr. I understand. I see your point. I apologize. Yeah, that if this is So noted. But I'm going to start on my left and see if we have clarifying questions starting at this end.
Yeah, I have some questions for staff. I think the focus on the whole FAR issue, has kind of largely skewed toward the housing. But I'm also curious to how this is going to go ahead in terms of like RENA. I know that the previous staff report kind of looked at the development that the city has approved and so forth, but if Sunset Development Company continues to, use the density bonus law and we keep pushing RENA numbers to, okay, they're not meeting, the amount of housing that they're supposed to provide for affordable units, are we going to end up in a deficit at some point in time?
So if I understand your question correctly, the question is if projects are using density bonus to meet their RENA numbers or to provide affordable housing on site.
Okay, sorry, I'll go back. So, for last PC meeting, how we went ahead and approved Bishop Ranch 11, and the city has gone ahead and in their housing element, they've gone ahead and given to the state the number of affordable units that are going to be in certain housing opportunity sites. And that was well below what we had anticipated and given the state. So if we continue doing that, just because we have a buffer, like I know that's why that was approved, but if that continues to happen for the rest of these sites, are we going to be in a deficit at some point? Does that make sense?
Sure. So I guess let me start with the housing element and what's identified in the housing element. In the housing element, we have housing opportunity sites that we've identified to the state that are going to be sites that we are assuming will have redevelopment potential over the next 8 years, and that there's an expectation of units being produced on those sites. And of those units, a estimated density range was identified to come up with a number of units that we typically refer to as realistic capacity. The realistic capacity is a way for the city to demonstrate how we will be achieving our RENA on a site-by-site basis, and that when you add all of the housing opportunity sites and the realistic capacity, that demonstrates that the city has the number of sites allocated will be able to meet our RENA obligation. And then some, right? And then some is our buffer that we also have built in. Each site is defined by the density range for that zoning. A property owner has the ability to develop or propose a project within that density range, regardless of whether or not the city sees it at a higher development potential when we identify the realistic capacity. Ultimately, number of units is going to fall within that range in order to meet the housing opportunity site requirements and the density requirements for redevelopment of that site. And they're also going to have to meet the inclusionary housing ordinance that requires a site to provide an allocation towards affordable housing as part of their project commitments. In terms of the floor area ratio and how that plays into RENA, floor area ratio was not included as part of the realistic capacity calculation. It was purely looking at the density potential based on the range that was identified. And so what's out of the city's control is what each property can come in and propose as long as they meet that density range and the development standards. State density bonus gives the flexibility to the developer to go in above and beyond the inclusionary ordinance, but also as long as they're in the density range, there's no ability for the city to say no to the project and when it comes to a housing opportunity site, unless there's some very specific standards. Our goal with each project is to try to get as close to the realistic capacity, and then with the no net loss to continue to track that. At some point when the buffer no longer is large enough for us to continue to sustain, then we would have to look at alternative sites to continue to help build our buffer. So I think that's a long way of saying the city doesn't really have control over realistic capacity. It was identified in the housing element as a means to demonstrate that the sites that we currently have the ability. But other than trying to force, the only way to force a property to get closer to realistic capacity is to then increase the minimum density. And so without that control, there is no way for us to dictate to a property owner how many units that they need to put on site.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, under the Housing Accountability Act, we can't deny a project based on the density. So it's kind of safe to assume that, I mean, if you look at the projects that have been approved, the top 4, I mean, beside the Bishop Ranch Service Center, are on the lower end of that range that we've allowed for. I'm just kind of thinking in the long-term vision of things, like if we're saying, I don't know what, the realistic capacity necessarily is in terms of like density, like does it vary between like the sites, or is it just?
It does. So when we calculated realistic capacity, we did look at site constraints. So existing value of the improvements that are currently on the property, what the potential of maintaining the existing improvements and potential easements or leases that may have been signed long-term that could constrain the potential for redevelopment on site. Using all of that data, there was a density range that was associated with each parcel. In some cases, for example, where a range was 20 to 60, some cases the city applied a 45 dwelling units per acre estimate to determine realistic capacity. In other cases, we were closer to the lower end of the range because of different constraints that were on the site. So it's not, we don't necessarily use just one consistent dwelling units per acre on each parcel. That's a housing opportunity site. We look at the specifics of that parcel to try to get as close to what we can envision being redeveloped on that site.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. My other question was, I guess in terms of the other DMU North Zone properties, from what my understanding is the applicant has kind of come forward sort of addressing it in terms of only the sites that would have, kind of like the housing opportunity sites, but also like I'm curious about the other property owners as well, and if, in the long run, if they would benefit from the 0.5 FAR. I mean, I think it would be just a more lenient approach. It's not really like a question. It's more so like a comment to the, just planning commission more so. But I'm also starting to think like, what would be the long-term ramifications for the other properties that wouldn't do the 100% housing on site. Because that's a pretty big significant decrease in square footage that we would be allowing for. And from reading the general plan, you know, it was meant to be a mixed use sort of designation, and just kind of looking at the long term. And I think right now the focus is more so like on what the market is dictating right now, and not looking at like, you know, whether or not this is going to change in 10 to 20 years, which it will. You know, it's always evolving. So, you know, I get, you know, that I think the focus is right now on what the market is calling for now. But, you know, also this is a pretty big amount of acreage that we're looking at. So it's pretty important. I think my other, sorry, this is actually a question and not a comment, was, so for the parking ratio, like I know when you look at the development standards, it says to look at a specific subsection in the code regarding parking. So I'm curious, like, say we have like a 0.5, the FAR, right? And we're doing the highest intensity use. How many, like, would that call for half of that site to be parking? I mean, I know we have our landscaping standards and so forth, and, you know, internal circulation, that would have to be part of that. But I'm also kind of just wondering, like, how that would work for properties that, you know, wouldn't be doing 100% residential. Like, are we going to have a lot of subsurface parking then at that point?
So I think potentially, so again, floor area ratio is taking the net building area divided by the gross area. And so parking typically would not be included as part of that FAR calculation, because we would take that out of the total in order to calculate FAR. By having a higher requirement for building square footage, typically more building square footage would equate to more parking demand, because our ratios is based on one parking space per however many square feet. So if it's a ratio of one parking space for every 200 square feet, the higher your minimum FAR, the more potential parking that site would also need to provide in order to accommodate that additional square footage. So there is a potential that because we net out parking, but parking is a requirement of the zoning ordinance to support that use, you could be seeing much higher building envelopes or to increase the parking on site, or going subterranean in order to support the minimum parking that's required. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask a clarifying question on packet page 24 for floor area ratio. There's a non-residential minimum and a residential minimum, and it says not applicable for DMU North. I'm kind of confused as to, I mean, what does that mean by non-residential minimum or residential minimum for FAR?
So in the mixed use zones, there's a variety of mixed use zones. There's the DMU North, South, as well as mixed use commercial and mixed use residential emphasis. During the course of the general plan update, there was a discussion on when a site is a non-housing opportunity site, how much of that site does the city want to see as non-residential? And how can one maintain a minimum floor area dedicated to non-residential uses? And so the decision ultimately was in the DMU North and South, we would not have a minimum residential or non-residential FAR. But in the commercial and residential, that we would have associated non-residential or residential FARs in order to apply a standard for any redevelopment of those sites to have a certain building square footage dedicated to uses that we would like to see on those sites if they were to be redeveloped. So a minimum non-residential FAR in the commercial emphasis mixed use would signal that you would need to have, in order to redevelop, maintain a 0.7 FAR, 0.5, whatever that standard is, that you would need to maintain that on site as part of your redevelopment. You would have to accommodate for a non-residential building square footage on top of what's existing right now. So hopefully that explains what the minimum non-residential.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all my questions.
Mr. Curtis.
So let's have a couple quick questions. By changing the FAR to the minimum of 0.5 or any of the ones that were mentioned, does it have any financial impact on the city in terms of tax revenue or any other type of revenue that the city would be impacted in any way?
I think from just a purely, because a lot of this is a bit speculative, right, or hypothetical situations. And so it's difficult to say whether a site would be redeveloped with residential or commercial, because there's opportunities for that in a mixed use zone to be able to increase the land use that would be available on the site. So there's no identified fiscal impact that the city can associate with lowering the minimum FAR, because the range is still available to the developer to identify what that site is going to be developed at. But certainly if a developer chooses to build at the lower end of the range, that may equate to more units or less units, depending on how large they want that unit to be. And so it's a little difficult to really answer is there a fiscal impact to the city? The range still exists for the developer.
So let's just take that in context of then the state density bonus. Since they can use that and go below the current FAR that we have, has there been any financial impact to the city by them using the state density bonus instead?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So it could be basically the same financial impact, whether we lower it or if they use the state density bonus, because either way, they can go below the 1.25 that we are currently.
That's correct. Or use variances or other tools that the city has available to the property.
Through the chair, one other point to mention, there's likely a step up in property tax basis with any redevelopment of a project.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the degree of that would depend on how much redevelopment occurs and what the current basis is. But generally speaking, when you improve a property, you raise value.
Of course, yeah. But the change of the FAR or going to the state density bonus, that's still going to happen regardless of which one of those you choose.
Correct.
Correct. And to add on to that too, as the commission understands and knows that our conditions of approval require evaluating if a CFD is also necessary to bridge that gap in services to make the city whole for the maintenance and operation that we do have for that property. So there are mechanisms in place that help to bridge any perceived or real gap.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
question, couple more, sorry.
That's fine.
What environmental impacts, if any, are there to the city if we change to the FAR to 0.5 or 0.7 or whatever one it might be?
So I can speak to CEQA in terms of, or environmental impact in terms of this particular project as far as the policy change itself, going from 1.25 to 0.5. That analysis was done as part of this project review. It was identified there's no additional impacts to the environment based on the policy change. As far as on a project-by-project basis, each project that is proposed on any of these DMU North sites would have its own independent environmental review that's conducted as part of those projects. And so, but typically speaking, the policy is what dictates, what can be developed there. And so, as long as they fall within the analysis will continue to be done as part of each project's review.
Right, so really no environmental impact except for obviously if you have to build more units, you're going to bring in more people, potentially more cars and things of that nature. So that could actually have an environmental impact. Although from this financial impact, you could also be bringing more people for sales in our local community. So it could be a wash one way or the other, realistically.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. From a safety standpoint, is there any impact to our community in a safety or health impact by changing FAR? In terms of services provided, being able to move throughout the community in terms of safety on the roads, whatever it may be?
No. This is the development standard is being lowered. And so the impacts that could arise from safety would potentially be lower because of the reduction in the FAR.
And from a growth potential then, what are the impacts by lowering the FAR for the city in terms of pure growth, the amount of people we can pack into a small area that we know is the City Walk area?
So I think, similar to safety, the lower your minimum, that will always be available to a property owner to use the minimum as their to meet their development standard. That can always lower as we've talked about in the staff report, the intensity of the construction on a site, and so that has the potential for lowering the growth on a site. We've had other projects that continue to meet those same standards, whether they're going to be on-site or off-site. The number of units, based on what the applicant has told us, would continue to be the same regardless of whether they're on-site or off-site. And so there would be no additional growth impacts.
So financially, safety, environmental, and growth, no additional impacts by lowering this the same way that they would be if they were just using the state density bonus realistically. It's pretty much the same.
That's correct.
So for this gives us a little bit more flexibility in what we would actually bring into our city in terms of the design.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Alford. Questions?
Sure. The general plan amendment in and of itself, does that change anything? We've heard a couple of comments about heights of buildings and things like that. Is there anything wrapped up inside the general plan amendment FAR change that could change our height limit, which I believe is 85 feet in the core area? That's anything there?
So just to clarify, DMU North has a maximum height limit of 85 feet with some caveats for daylight plane and other things that have to be factored into that height limit. But the proposed project is only changing the floor area ratio minimum. It doesn't allow for an increase in height beyond what the 55 feet already allows for in the DMU North Zone. So even with parking and structured parking or podium style development, all of that would be counted towards your 85 feet.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you for that. We've had two projects that have qualified and been approved under state density bonus, BR7 and BR11. Hypothetically, if the FAR requirement is changed and they no longer technically need the state density bonus, I know they got other things other than height, just concentrate on the FAR. If they wanted to modify their project because they no longer need the state density bonus, what's the process that they would need to go through in order to modify their project now that they don't need state density bonus waivers here?
So the two projects that have already been approved, the way that any project would request amendments to their already entitled projects would be to have to amend that through a development plan amendment application. And so any modifications to the design of the project, so the number of units, would have to be an amendment to the original application that's been approved. So whoever that is proposing that would have to reapply for that entitlement change.
Not to put words in your mouth, but that to me says there'll be a public process in order to make those changes. Whether it's a public zoning administrator or a planning commission or a city council public hearing. Is that?
Yeah. So depending on the scope of the change, sometimes we might have changes that may be minor, like there's no more crepe myrtle trees. I'd like to replace it with, another variety. And the resolution and conditions of approval do allow for certain minor modifications. But things like number of units, affordable housing commitments, all of those do require a new public process.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Kind of follow up on a little bit Commissioner Avila's question. FAR versus density. I know we get hung up on that a little bit. It's my understanding, and maybe you can clarify, the FAR standard is not implemented in 100% housing projects generally. Is that right? And, it's a commercial or a mixed use concept, not a housing concept.
You can use floor area ratio on residential projects like our zoning ordinance currently does. It hasn't been historically what the city has used. So over the 40 years that the city has been incorporated, we haven't had a floor area ratio associated with your residential projects. They may have floor area ratios for mixed use projects where there's a commercial or a non-residential component to a project. But historically, the city has not used FAR as a standard for site-wide, in particular for residential developments.
Okay. And I think, as I recall, it makes sense if it's a mixed-use development, because then you have a commercial element and you have a housing element. And conceptually, it might make sense to have a FAR requirement in that case. But what we're talking about, the projects that are coming through are 100% housing, which I'm not sure when it became okay, but at some point, state law says that a mixed use property could develop at 100% housing, and that was allowed or under state law. It kind of came into, I think it came into the story sometime not that long ago,
Yeah, that's kind of post 2018 when all of the first housing laws were kind of set in additional housing laws above and beyond what the city traditionally saw from the state. And so since 2018, we've seen a number of state bills that have restricted city's ability to
So that, I guess my question is, so the forcing a FAR requirement on a project that is 100% housing may not be something that, while it's possible, it's not really something San Ramon's ever done, and it's not necessarily, and I think Sunset shared with us that they don't see that very well, and it's kind of a concept that really is at a mismatch with just a housing project. It's the density that matters, from HCD and from normal development standards.
Yeah, it certainly, when you have both a floor area ratio and a density, oftentimes when you're developing a project, trying to meet both of those at the same time can be difficult because not only are you trying to accommodate building square footage while also maintaining your parking standards as we've talked about this evening and those the minimum landscape requirements on site and all of the other standards that the city has for that for a development project. But you also have to then fit into a density range and provide affordable housing associated with that. And so the more standards that you put onto a project, the narrower and narrower that development has in terms of designing the site. So when you have a 1.25 floor area ratio and you look at all the existing floor areas, for the majority of them are less than 0.5, you're effectively saying you need to more than double what you have on site anytime you are considering redeveloping that parcel, in addition to all of the other standards that you have to meet with density range, with parking, with landscaping.
That makes sense. Thank you. I did have one clarification question for Sunset, Ms. Hill, if I could, In the letter that you sent to us back prior to our previous meeting, I think I took out of it that in order to meet the FAR requirement and you may or may not be able to meet the density 20 to 60. And did I understand that correctly? If you're going to build a project that meets the 1.25 FAR, you would be providing similar to what you had to do with either Belmont or Avalon or related. You'd end up being outside of the 20 to 60. You'd be greater than 60. Did I remember that correctly? Is that?
Yeah, so generally what we presented was if we're looking at FARs north of 1.25, we're looking at densities that are higher than 60 units per acre.
Okay.
And so it's the FAR range of 1.25 to 2.75 is a density range of really, based on the numbers here, 69 to 89 units per acre, which is much different than the 20 to 60 unit per acre for the DMU North.
I guess you might be forced to ask for a waiver, but in the opposite direction in that case,
Yeah.
to get
Yes.
past the 60. And then the other comment you made there is, and it had to do with securing funding, and that apartment complexes are difficult to secure. 5-story buildings are capital intensive. Related hotel remained stalled for over 2 years. But then you also said that getting funding for rental housing is difficult, 5+ story, but building 5+ story for sale condominium projects is nearly impossible. So does that imply that, in order to meet the 1.25, it may not be possible to get the funding to build the project at all, or, and meet those two objectives of the 1.25,
So right now, if we look at the financial markets, it's really difficult to capitalize a large 5 to 7 story multifamily apartment community where you have 200 to 300 apartment homes, because the total building needs to be built before you deliver that first unit. And those buildings take about 2.5 years to build because you're building your structured parking and you're building all of your residential units. And so you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars that need to be invested before you can generate your first lease to have your first resident move in and start paying rent. And typically with those communities, you want to deliver them over time. so that you have the ability to lease up the building and attract those 300 households who want to live in that new apartment community. You don't want to deliver multiple communities at the same time where you have 1,200 homes that are all delivered at the same time and competing against each other in order to attract residents. So that's one of the challenges is they're really expensive to build. They take a long time to build, and it takes a while before there's revenue that's generated from that first lease. So that's what we're seeing right now with the financial markets. And when we look to Related, what we're trying to help them solve for is how do we improve their financial feasibility? And the feedback that we've received is that by helping them with their affordable housing, which is a proposal that we had outlined, we can improve their financial feasibility, and we can partner with an affordable housing developer who specializes in building these communities, which offers deeper affordability and communities that are really developed for particular households. And they provide resident services. They offer all sorts of different amenities to their residents. So it's an opportunity to provide more affordable housing at a deeper level of affordability, and then also to improve the financial feasibility for the market rate apartment communities. So
Okay, okay. No, that's helpful. Thank you. And then at a lower FAR, you know, it's, I have if the FAR was down to .5, you know, is it likely that we'll see projects similar to the Iron Horse Village in 7 and 11 down the road, you know, that are the sort of not the 5-story buildings, not the 7-story, but more like the close to single family or single family like, you know, it's attached walls, but they look more like a single family that one goes up and it gets sold, or 10 goes up and they get sold. Those kind of projects like what we've approved for 7-Eleven and what we're seeing being built for Iron Horse Village, is that the likely kind of properties that we're going to see like in the future with the lower FAR? Yeah.
So I'm going to answer your question in two different ways. The first way I'm going to respond is if we look at City Walk, which is directly south of DMU North, we have 4,500 residential homes that are planned for in this 5 to 7-story residential building typology. And the first community that we look at is Related. The second community that we're looking at is Avalon. And so we do have those higher intensity residential developments directly south of the DMU North zone. And what we're trying to solve for with our affordable housing strategy and our general housing strategy is how do we get those communities to be developed? And one of the pieces of that is helping them with the affordable. And then when we look at 8,000 units within Bishop Branch, we see that there's a need for a diversity of housing typologies. We've heard from the community, we've heard from the Planning Commission, everyone doesn't want to see 85-foot buildings throughout all of Bishop Branch. And so we're trying to blend these different housing typologies. Right now, what the market is able to develop are these 2 to 3-story single-family homes for sale opportunities. And so we're focusing on delivering those types of housing in select locations, and then looking at how do we spur these larger residential apartment communities.
Thank you. I think that's it for my questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. Wallace, you have the floor.
I think I'll stay at my desk. First thing, I had submitted to the commission, as is noted by our recording secretary, a document that I had cleverly marked as Exhibit 2. I would like to make that part of the administrative record. I have a couple questions for Ms. Yee, but I want to follow up on a question that came from Commissioner Alpert. Bob wants to develop a project in DMU North. He is going to build a mixed-use project where he meets the requirement of 20 units per acre. Bob is going to comply with our inclusionary housing ordinance, but you know what? He does not like the state density bonus law, so he's not going to qualify for it. Under state law, does Bob have the right to develop that site at 100% residential, being that's in a mixed-use area?
If Bob owns a housing opportunity site,
No housing opportunity site. We all know that a housing opportunity site can be developed at 100% residential. That's the price you pay for making it a HOS. Nope, this is a straight, plain vanilla piece of property.
okay. And so
For
Bob's
example,
proposal is 20 dwelling units per acre, and he complies with the inclusionary housing ordinance.
our city housing, inclusionary housing ordinance.
Correct. So your question is, can Bob build his 20 dwelling units per acre project?
No, it's can Bob build his project in a mixed-use zone at 100% residential when it's not a housing opportunity site, or under our general plan, it's not near a commercial building, so he can claim that it's horizontal mixed use.
So if Bob's site does not already have a non-residential use on it, so if the site already exists with commercial uses, I wouldn't see why Bob couldn't build on that site with the existing development that already exists and add residential at 20 dwelling units per acre, as long as they meet all of the development standards.
That's the question I already posed to you, which is it's horizontal mixed use because the residential development is next to commercial property. My question is, if you create a clean slate, there's nothing around it, you wipe out everything that's on it, can Bob build 100% residential in a mixed use zone like DMU North?
The project would, in a DMU North zone, in order to redevelop the site as a, and when it's not a housing opportunity site, does have to have a mix of residential and non-residential uses.
Yeah. So the answer is no, he can't do that.
That's correct.
Okay.
No.
All right. Now, I did warn you ahead of time that I was going to ask you some questions about your report, and I know you have your computer up and running. So let's start at packet page 10. The statement that I want to cast you about reads as follows. Quote, no amendments are proposed to the general plan land use or zoning map or densities, close quote. Now, when you wrote or densities, did you mean just residential densities for DMU North, which runs 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre?
The density range stays the same at 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre.
So your reference to densities not being changed by the proposed general plan amendment only refers to the residential part of a project.
That's correct, the
Okay.
density range.
Now, dropping the FAR from 1.25 to 0.5 would allow for lowering of the density of a building which contains both residential and commercial, would it not?
Lowering the FAR could potentially lower the density, the number of units that are produced on site.
Let's do a hypothetical, make it easier.
Yep.
Bob has a plan for a building, and it's a mixed use area. Bob wants to have both commercial and residential in the same building envelope. So Bob originally plans his building for 1.25 FAR. So he has, say, 2 floors of commercial and 2 floors of residential. Now, Bob is smart, and his residential density is within the 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre range. Then we change the FAR to 0.5. Bob's going to keep those 2 floors of residential. He's going to have his 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre. Can Bob then nix one of the floors of commercial as long as the total floor space in that building is 0.5 compared to the land?
Yes.
All right. Now, your next statement I want to ask you about is also on packet page 10. It says that approving this general plan amendment, quote, may result in lower, quote, realistic, close quote, development analyzed by the general plan EIR. When you said lower realistic development, were you referring to residential development?
So residential, it's development in general, because the floor area ratio would apply to sites that are not currently residential.
So would it be fair to state that your comment that adopting this general plan might result in lower realistic development would include both a lower residential density, but also lower commercial density?
Lower square footage for a commercial.
Right, which is a way of describing density, is it not?
You could use that, sure.
Okay, now, our general plan contains 4 different mixed-use areas, does it not?
I believe there's 5, including city center mixed use.
Okay, the ones I came up with were mixed-use commercial emphasis, which has a minimum FAR of 0.7 and a density range for residential of 20 to 40 dwelling units per acre, correct? Correct?
Correct.
And the same applies to mixed-use residential emphasis, 20 to 40 dwelling units per acre, FAR of 0.7.
Right.
Now, city center, on the other hand, it has a density range for residential, but no FAR requirement, correct?
Correct.
And then we come down to DMU North. Now, DMU North has the highest residential density planned for in the city of 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre, correct?
DMU North and DMU South both have 20 to dwelling units per acre range.
Okay. But so DMU is tied with DMU South for the highest residential density?
Range.
Yes. Okay. DMU also has a FAR of 1.25, which is higher than its neighboring mixed-use areas, correct?
For the minimum site-wide FAR, that's correct.
And doesn't it also have a higher maximum FAR?
Right.
All right. The general plan describes the DMU North area as follows, quote, development is generally intended to be vertical in nature, with residential entries taking advantage of the city's walking district and allowance for higher density, close quote. Now, given that DMU North has a higher density range for residential and a higher FAR than either of its 2 neighboring mixed-use areas, isn't it a little bit contrary to the whole concept of the DMU North area to lower the FAR below those of our adjoining mixed-use areas, commercial emphasis and residential emphasis?
I think ultimately that's the determination that the Planning Commission and City Council will have to make as far as whether or not that's a change that the city supports. Ultimately, the applicant has proposed the 0.5 to provide a new range. And so whether or not there is a conflict there or an issue with the range being lower than other mixed use zones, I think ultimately that's the question for the commission.
Well, I agree with that. My question is, do you have an opinion?
Through the chair, I just wanted to mention that at the last meeting, the topic of whether or not the FAR and the adjoining mixed-use areas was correct or viable came up, but the commission made a statement to proceed with just this, and we can look at the other FAR issues in the future through a separate process.
Well, that's not the question I was pointing to. The question is, one of the findings we have to make is whether the general plan amendment is consistent with the general plan. And my question was whether, given the context of DMU North in the general plan as compared to its neighboring mixed-use areas, whether it is actually contrary to the general plan to drop the FAR below that of the neighboring areas.
It is not, because it allows for the higher standard to go forward if it's viable for a project to go forward. It creates flexibility.
Well, you can say it creates flexibility, but it creates a lower floor for development in the area, and therefore it is less dense than as currently designed and also for its neighbors, isn't it?
But you can't predict what level development's going to come in at.
Well, that's a good point. So since you brought it up, isn't our general plan, as one of the commissioners pointed out, a 20-year plan?
Correct.
And how long has DMU North been in existence?
Less than 2 years.
Less than two, barely a year, is it not?
And you can also look at I don't want to go down a pathway here, but we've also had 2 projects come in that weren't capable of building at that level, and a concept review that was abandoned because of FAR issues.
Well, we will get into that. So
I'm
you're
sure we
jumping at it? You will. All right. Now, can you turn to the chart that is packet page 15, please? Now, this is the list of DMU floor areas that you've graded for us. Is that right?
The table, correct.
Right. And a number of these are all currently commercial properties, aren't they?
The list of DMU North parcels that are on this table, with the exception of City Village, which is 100% residential with the park on site. The remainder of those are in, some have been approved as 100% residential, but the remainder of the list that have not been approved are currently non-residential.
Okay. The information for BR6 refers to the office buildings that were on the site.
That's correct.
Okay. BR7 refers to the office building that's on the site.
For when you're strictly looking at the purple column for existing building square footage, those are the building square footages associated with the current use that's on site.
And that would also apply to BR11 as well,
That's right.
and also to Toyota.
Yes. So
And
all
also-
all of the columns currently identify the existing buildings square
All right.
footage.
Now, on packet page 12, you have a statement which reads as follows, quote, 2 existing sites in DMU North, paren Bishop Ranch 8 and 15, close paren, already exceed the minimum 0.5 FAR. The remainder of the sites would need to increase the existing square foot in order to meet the new minimum FAR, close quote. Now, you're not saying that the existing buildings now have to change, do you? Rather that if those buildings are torn down and something else put in their place, the new structures would have to meet the FAR.
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're
Okay.
saying is that in order to do the analysis that the commission had requested to look at what additional FAR beyond 0.5 or what additional building square footage would be necessary to get to 0.7, we're simply demonstrating that 2 of those sites already exceed 0.5. And so if you're trying to analyze what a site at 0.5 looks like, those 2 sites already exceed the 0.5. And then the additional columns will show what the FAR would look like if you were then to increase beyond what is currently existing on site.
Well, basically, that's a figure that says if you tore down the building and built something else, this is the FAR that would be required.
It's not trying to represent whether you tore down or not tore down. It's simply identifying what the existing building square footage is. The reason why we put the building square footages was you can physically see how Toyota looks like at a 0.19 FAR. And with an existing 250,000 square foot building on site. So it's a lot easier when you're saying, I visually see this building at this square footage with this much FAR. How much additional square footage would one need to add onto the site in order to get to 0.5 or 0.7 or 0.75? That's ultimately the reason why we separated the columns and provided the building square footages, just so that one could visualize, not that we're saying somebody's going to tear down or that is a potential, but that's always a potential. It's just purely just to help the commission visualize what something like a 0.5 above what currently exists would look like on site.
Okay, further on packet page 12, you write, quote, because commercial projects would not be able to utilize the state density bonus law to waive the FAR standard, the higher minimum FAR standard could substantially impact the ability to redevelop these parcels, period, close quote. Now, we've already discussed that DMU North is in a mixed zone, correct?
Right.
So any new development in these areas would have to include a residential component, would they not?
I would say not necessarily. If an existing property wanted to maybe add on to their site or improve their site, in the past, existing sites that exist that may have to make improvements on their site, we typically consider those legal non-conforming uses. But certainly, I think it depends on the level of redevelopment that would be occurring on the site. But typically, when there is an existing commercial use, that use has had the ability to continue to remain on site without having to add on new land uses to keep the site.
Right. If you have a non-conforming use, that is the use that was appropriate at one time, but the zoning has changed, so it is no longer eligible under that new zoning, you can keep doing what you've been doing. That's what a non-conforming use is, correct?
Right. So if the veterinary center wanted to expand their emergency operations and add some additional square footage, that typically wouldn't trigger the need for them to add a housing unit on site.
Isn't it generally true that a non-conforming use can remain but not be expanded?
So there are carve-outs in the zoning ordinance for expansion of legal non-conforming uses.
Okay. So let's talk about someone who wants to add residential. Let's make it simple. Bob has a commercial site on his property, and he wants to add a residential development on it. Now, because that's the same one project, isn't the state density bonus available to this mixed-use project?
State density bonus can only be used when an applicant is providing a minimum number of lower income units.
Yes, well, my question was, can't Bob, if he qualifies for the density bonus through the residential units that he proposes to do, qualify for a density bonus?
Yeah, any project that qualifies for the
Okay.
density bonus could use the density bonus.
Okay, and this includes mixed-use developments, that is residential and commercial on the same site?
Right.
Okay, so let's suppose that Bob wants to build a residential complex next to his existing commercial building. And Bob meets the requirements for the required dwelling units per acre, but he doesn't meet the requirements for FAR. If Bob designates 5% of the residential units he wants to build for very low income tenants or purchasers, doesn't Bob qualify for the state density bonus and can therefore demand that the city waive the FA requirement for that project?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's talk about what's required to do that. Our city inclusionary ordinance requires that 15% of all residential units be set aside for either tenants if it's rental or owners if it's for sale units in several different income categories, correct?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Okay. Our inclusionary housing ordinance with respect to residential units requires that the developer set aside 15% of the units for affordable either renters or purchasers, depending upon whether the project is for sale or rent, correct?
Right.
All right. Now, And the baseline for our inclusionary housing ordinance for very low income renters or purchasers is 3% of the total units, correct?
For sale projects, correct.
It's also true for rental, is it not?
For rental, it's a 50-50 split of low and very low units. There is no moderate requirement as part of the inclusionary ordinance.
So for the sale units, which is what your table on packet page 15 talks about, if Bob, instead of setting aside 3% of his residential units for very low, he sets aside 5%, he's entitled to a density bonus, correct? Okay. And that density bonus allows him to have the FAR waived for his project, doesn't it?
If Bob were to choose that as one of his requested waivers, yes.
Okay. And also, although technically it's not a waiver, if he qualifies for a density bonus, isn't the project subject to certain limits on what type of parking can be demanded by the city of that project?
So density bonus does have different carve-outs for parking standards. That would be currently less than the city's parking standards. The standards for lower income units, when they're provided on site, typically would be less parking provided on site than the city standard.
Now, you were asked about BR7 and BR11. Those are two projects in DMU North that we approved, one in December and one last month, I believe. In both of those instances, neither project met the 1.25 current FAR for DMU North, but both were approved, correct?
Yes, I think we're all present here for that, yes.
Yes. And the way that happened is that the developer moved 4 units from the required low income category required by our inclusionary housing ordinance down to the very low bracket. And that qualified the projects, both projects, for the density bonus, correct?
That's correct. And I believe that we've already covered these questions in the past 2 public hearings, but is there a question related to the 0.5 or 0.75 or 0.7 that are we leading into a question that hasn't already been asked?
Funny you should ask that. Could you turn to packet page 15, which is your chart?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Now, the columns that are marked estimated DU, that is a calculation done by you of how many units would be produced if the FAR for these particular properties were 0.5, 0.7, and 0.75, correct?
So I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to add on if I may to
Yes,
that.
but answers are perfectly okay.
Yes, okay. So the answer is yes. But what I do want to just make sure I clarify is that this is purely an estimate based on the commission asking staff to analyze what a 0.5 or 0.7 or 0.75 FAR would look like. We took it one step further to try to equate this to dwelling units. And there are different metrics and different data points that you can use to calculate dwelling units. But really, truly, the analysis should probably, what we do know 100% is the building square footage has to be that minimum that's shown on the table. Whether it equates to those dwelling units, it was purely just a way to demonstrate what that equivalent might look like. You can take building square footage and divide that by whatever size that unit is and come up with all different ranges of units. One could use the census data for rental units, which is 998 square feet. One could use 1,330 square feet that was in the housing element tables. One could use 1345 based on US Census, or take information from past projects that the city has approved. So there's multiple ways of getting to dwelling unit numbers. This is really just the commission asked for some analysis, and this was one way to provide you some concrete examples of what that might look like.
No, I understand that. And I understand where you pulled the number for the unit sizes from. My question, follow-up question to you is, isn't it true that over the last 5 years, there have been hardly any units developed in any for sale project in the city of San Ramon that have units as small as 1,345 square feet?
Yeah, most projects that have gone under construction or were recently approved, you can see that, based on the project plans, that there's oftentimes a range of unit types, whether they're stacked flats or townhomes or attached duets. In the case of San Ramon, the market has proposed units that have exceeded the 1,345 square feet. But depending on again, what unit square footage you chose, I can give you every number using whatever square footage you wanted me to input in, but without that direction previously, this was the closest data point that I would consider reliable as far as a number that is demonstrated to have real construction associated with developments that have happened in all varying markets. So whether that's San Ramon or other markets, it's a number that one can be safe to say that is demonstrated to have been constructed as an average in the United States.
If you're trying to give this commission, which sits in the city of San Ramon, a visualization of what some of these projects might look at, wouldn't it be more reasonable to use a figure for the housing units that are for sale that have actually been sold or that have been approved in this city over the past 5 years to give better visualization of what we can look forward to in the future?
Yeah, and you can see that in the gray columns. The gray columns do show you the square footages associated with those sites. And as you've already pointed out, we've all sat through those commission meetings where we've approved those 190 units for BR7, 195 for BR11, 404 units for City Village. And so that information is readily available. If you wanted us to take an average, we could certainly do that. That would obviously, because you're using a higher square footage, result in less dwelling units per the minimum FAR. But again, the information from San Ramon's market is driven based on what the current market conditions are. We're trying to look at a 20-year housing and general plan cycle. And so there's certainly any data point that you would like for us to plug in. The formula is already there. You just tell us what metrics you want us to use.
Oh, I did. That's page 10 of Exhibit 2, but we'll get into that later. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't really have questions at this point, other than I think mine are more in the discussion topic. So what I'd like to suggest at this point for the commission, could we take a 5-minute break here? And then come back and tackle the topic of the discussion of the topic. Now, we've clarified the questions. We've been at this since 6 o'clock and it's 7:40. So is that agreeable? Okay, 5 minutes. We'll be back at 7:45-ish. Take a quick bathroom break. Much. So before we get too much farther, and I have deferred my comments to this time. So what I'd like to do is just share some thoughts, not so much a question or clarification, but just share some thoughts in going forward. And I have jotted some notes as I've listened to this discussion, both with staff and commissioners and our applicant. And I'm going to refer to the page that was provided from the applicant. And I don't know if we can bring it back up where it talked about the development intensity, this page. You just so that folks can see what I'm referring to. Thank you. I know we don't usually, we call it an audible here. I know it's basketball season, but
Sounds good.
March Madness, yes. Yeah, what is the bracket here tonight? No.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Here we go. It's on the side. So I want to point this out because this has developed for me as I've been listening to this now for 4 meetings. I think this is a nice summary of what we're faced with here as the Planning Commission. If we look at this chart, we see City Village, BR7, and BR11, which have all been approved, and City Village, we know, is in process being developed. As you look across, the FAR of those top 3 are all in that 0.5 or more range. It meets the minimum for our dwelling units per acre, and it also abides by our height limitations. Okay? These are for sale units as we go forward, and they've also met our current affordable housing requirements. Now, as we look to the lower 4, we have the proposal for the BR Affordable Eden at 1.74, Belmont Village related and Avalon, which we have all approved, 1.4, 1.93, and 2 as the FAR. Again, the dwelling units are listed, and then you see also the height requirement. So here's what I'm coming to the conclusion here. And that is what we're asked to do here tonight is to simply focus on whether or not the change in the FAR for this one mixed use area serves the purposes for the city of San Ramon. And I'd like to look at it this way. On one hand, we have in this chart a premise of lower heights, for sale units with amenities where they have sidewalks, internal parks, things that make quality of life nice. Okay. We've seen those developments. We've approved them. We've also used our Planning Commission nice words to get them to add amenities as they've come. Some will call it strong arming, but I'd like to say using our nice words. All right. So I feel really good, and I hope my fellow commissioners, that when we've approved those projects, they're really good for the city of San Ramon. Okay. On the other hand, we have projects in which meet this FAR as it is in the current code. There's 85 feet tall. They're all apartments. There are amenities, but they're not the same as sidewalks and playgrounds and those kinds of things that we love about San Ramon. Now, the ones that are for sale units, those are going up like hotcakes. They're in the market now. And to Commissioner Curtis's point, we're going to be getting revenue from that and residents and tax base and property taxes now. The apartments are an if. And as the economy continues to be iffy, they get more and more interesting and problematic. Okay. So there are no residents. They aren't spending money. There is no property tax. So one of the things that we have to look at is what's best for San Ramon. Do we want to keep a quality of life with housing that suits the population that we have. And by all accounts, the sales of those units dictate that that is a desirable commodity in this part of town? Or do we wait for something else and wait and wait, which serves apparently no one? It will not get us those affordable units. It will not bring in workforce housing for a diverse population. Those are the choices. In this commission, that's what we have to deal with. And so what I want to ask right now, and we've spent several meetings on this, and I know some people still have more comments, but if I was to ask what is the temperature, the sentiment right now for what's before us, which is whether or not to change the FAR here tonight. So, I mean, just where are each of us on this? How are we feeling? Because if it's a no-go, then let's, know that. But if we're leaning towards doing, agreeing to this resolution, let's get on with that one too. So anybody would like to comment so I can feel how we're going on this? To the left, to the right?
I'll go ahead. Thank you for your words. I feel that we've had a really good discussion on this. There's been a lot of good depth of discussion, given the fact that there are other mixed units or mixed use residential emphasis that has a 0.5 for residential, and that it would not be out of the range of San Ramon to do that. I feel that this would be good for us to look at voting on the resolution moving forward.
Okay. Commissioner Avila?
Yeah, I think we've also had a really good discussion. I've appreciated staff and all the commissioners' comment as well as public comment. It does go back to with FAR and how the city views it more in terms of the density rather than FAR. And at the end of the day, for mixed use, there is no percentage requirement that we have to have 10% commercial or whatever percentage. It's simply so long as the project has some component of, commercial or retail that makes it mixed use. So yeah, I can definitely see kind of how this was, I guess, overlooked or was made in error. But yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Albert, how are you leading on this?
So first of all, I think we're at a place where we should be voting. And then personally, in thinking about this, and the findings we must make on a general plan amendment are very specific. And I think we've met, in my opinion, we can make those findings. Whether this is a good thing or not, for a lot of the comments already made, it does support housing. It is supportive of our housing element. It does demonstrate to HCD as we're going through our mid-cycle review that we are making progress and taking away governmental constraints to housing production. And more importantly, are we likely to see any projects should we allow this type of project? And I think the answer is yes, based on the years waiting for Avalon and for related to get funding versus what we've seen getting built and sold. I do think it ends up with better neighborhoods, less dense, more amenities, as you said, and we've heard in public comment. And less dense equals less traffic, equals less impact to our cities. So the only con that I can think of is there is a theoretical possibility that we'll continue to see development at the lower end of the range. However, the lower end of the range but getting built versus waiting for the higher range and not getting built, I think we're worse off by, continuing to hope that magically 60 units are going to get funded and get built. The other thing that we have not talked about, the kinds of units that we're seeing get built is also consistent with trying to attract homeowners in that so-called missing middle that we talk about that's not really readily present in San Ramon. So I'm in support of the general plan amendment as proposed. I don't think there's any more analysis needed on my part. And I think the 0.5 as proposed is something I can support.
Commissioner Wallace?
How much of a comment do you want?
Short and sweet.
Well, I don't think you're going to get that unless you give me an opportunity later to have a little longer one before we go over the resolution.
Could we get the highlights?
Sure, although lowlights might be. The first thing I want to point out is something that no one's talking about. And the fact is that the entity that's making this application under our municipal code isn't authorized to do that. They are not eligible. By proceeding with this application, you're basically saying that any person in San Ramon can come in and ask for a general plan amendment on property they don't own, because the applicant here does not own any property in DMU North. Now, maybe I'm a little more sensitive to this than most people because I'm a lawyer, and I feel that the law ought to be followed unless there's a real good reason why. And in this case, there's not a good reason to change our FAR, which has only been in effect for a year. First of all, as both Commissioner Avila and Ms. Yee pointed out, the general plan that you're talking about changing, it looks out 20 years, not 12 months. The markets will change. Even Sunset's representative agreed with that. So to sit there and make general plan amendments every 12 months does not seem to me to be logical. The second point is that I think that the evidence before us shows that what we're being asked to do is unnecessary. As everyone has pointed out, every project that's come in front of us has lacked the FAR, but they are being built. And why are they being built? Because our city has an inclusionary housing ordinance that every housing developer has to meet. In order for the developer to dispense with FAR, all they have to do is move 2% of the residential units from one category to the other. The cost to the developer of doing that is minimal at best. More likely, it's infinitesimal if you look at the size of the unit. So in terms of, are we really moving the ball compared to where we are now? In terms of producing affordable units, you're going backwards. First of all, if you eliminate this FAR requirement or move it down to 0.5, which in essence is the same thing, then the developer has no incentive to create those extra low, very low units. So we are losing out on that part of the spectrum. Second of all, we have affordable units in BR7 and BR11 that are for sale. One of the requirements, one of the objects of the inclusionary housing ordinance of any city is to provide affordable for sale units so that people have the ability to acquire property, build up equity, and move on. And also by owning property as opposed to renting it, they have skin in the game for the city. By doing this, you are going to eliminate the affordable for sale units in DMU North. You're going to eliminate the ability of people to buy homes and benefit from the appreciation and give them a stake long-term in this community. You don't need to do that. And I will point out that both in the March 4th submission by Sunset and also by Ms. Hill today, this is only the first step in a longer range plan, and we can't look at this in terms of blinders. What Sunset is planning to do is to, if the FAR is lowered, to remove all the affordable units off of BR7, BR11, BR12, and any other property they own. And they are going to put them in two places. You're going to put them in, if they get built, the 2 acres of Eden Housing, which has a density of 100 dwelling units per acre, 6 and 7 story buildings. Part of it will go as all affordable on BR8. One of the purposes of an inclusionary housing ordinance, including ours, is to spread out affordable units in the city in a variety of different building types. That has been our position since I've been in the city for the last 30 years. What is being proposed here is the antithesis of that. You're putting all the affordable units in a 2 acre spot right across from City Village. The rest of them will go in a building on BR8. The other thing is that the affordable units that they're talking about are not in DMU North. They said they want to move, I think it's roughly about 130, 140 units from the apartments, which are not in DMU North, and stick them in DMU North as rental units. So all of the rental units that they're proposing to create in the city will be rental units. That is not part of the city's objective or our inclusionary housing ordinance. So you have to take that into account when you look at, is this a good deal from San Ramon? We're giving up all the affordable housing. We're moving all the affordable housing and converting into rental into 2 small properties. That is not in the best interests of San Ramon. So I do not believe that this amendment is, first of all, it's not necessary as shown by BR7 and BR11, totally unnecessary. And second of all, were it followed through along the lines that Sunset has suggested and has said they're going to pursue, it will be to the detriment of what we have in San Ramon tried to do for the past 30 years. So I cannot support this, even leaving aside the fact that the applicant has no legal right to pursue this. Now, I'm only one vote. You asked for my opinion. I spent a lot of time looking at this. I look at DMU North. I look at what Sunset proposed. Now, next time you drive down Camino Ramon, look at City Village, because that's what they're proposing to do throughout the entire city, the area of DMU North. Now, to me, that's not exactly different types of housing. That's not something that we want. It's not something that is consistent with our general plan, because this area has always, since it was designed and voted on the city council, has been designed as the most intensely developed area in the city, in the core. And you basically are, if we do this, we are basically turning DMU North into Doherty Valley Light. We're going to have one type of housing, no affordable housing, certainly not for sale. And to me, if you read the general plan, that is not what the general plan is designed for.
Thank you. Right. Is there someone who would like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion to vote on resolution 03-25, the resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of San Ramon recommending City Council approval of the General Plan Amendment GPA 2024-0001, zoning ordinance text amendment TA 2024-003, and environmental review ENVR 2025-0001 to reduce the downtown mixed use North DMUN site floor area ratio FAR.
I will second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. Are we going to go through the resolution? All right. Comments, starting on packet page 16.
That you want comments, if we have any.
Yes, please.
All right. Let's start at the top where it says Sunset Development Company, paren, applicant, close paren. And then it says various property owners. There is no applicant for this project other than Sunset. None of the other property owners in DMU North have joined in the petition. We should strike the reference to various property owners.
Staff, is that correct?
No, that is not correct, ma'am. If you look further into the resolution, there is a whereas that the zoning administrator has the authority to include additional properties as part of this application. While Sunset Development is the applicant, I, as the zoning administrator, was able to expand the request to ensure horizontal and vertical consistency with the general plan and the zoning ordinance. So there are various properties who are affected by this request, and they have been notified of all the public hearings that have been brought before the commission.
Can I comment on that and ask some questions? First of all, the only application that's in front of us was cover the entire DMU North area. It was filed by Sunset itself. There's nothing in that application that refers in any way, shape, or form to the zoning administrator doing anything. So the only application we have is Sunset. There's no evidence, even though I asked for it, as you'll see in Exhibit 2. I asked for evidence that the zoning administrator had done anything, in particular had directed an extension of the application to cover the entirety of DMU North. There is no evidence to support what Ms. Chamberlain just said, even though it's been asked for. This application has to stand or fall on Sunset being the proper and eligible applicant for this proceeding.
Through the chair, if I could also just mention on the resolution, so staff has, depending on the author, different ways of identifying applicant and owners. Typically, one could write applicant : Sunset Development Company, and then we typically have, if the property owners are different, we put owners : various property owners. Perhaps that change would identify what the intention here was on those two lines, is to identify the applicant and the owners. So it doesn't necessarily have to be applicants parentheses. It would be probably redundant to put owners after owners in parentheses. So maybe changing the text to applicant : Sunset Development Company, and then owners being, the reason why we have the resolutions set up this way is just to identify purely the who the applicant is and the owners associated with the application.
Well, that is a valid point, except for the fact that there's no evidence that any quote owner close quote besides Sunset is the applicant for this proposal, and that the evidence was established at our last meeting that Sunset itself doesn't own any property in DMU North. So if you want to keep Sunset as quote the applicant close quote, it is the applicant, eligible or not. But to add quote various property owners close quote suggests that there are other owners who joined in this petition, and there's absolutely no evidence of that. And that's why I would ask that to be stricken.
I have a question on the application. Who was the applicant? Was it Sunset Development Company or?
Correct. Sunset Development Company is identified as the applicant.
Okay. Go ahead.
I understand this is outside of procedure. I would like to confirm that Sunset Development Company owns the service center, which is 2453 Camino Ramon. The deed has been provided to city staff as part of background information. So Sunset Development Company does specifically own property within DMU North. There are multiple Sunset-related entities that own other properties where it's not Sunset Development Company as the property owner, but it is an entity within the ownership entity, if that makes sense.
Well, Whoop, can you come back here for a second, please? Yes. What was testified to before was that the parcels that were attributed to Sunset in the staff report are actually owned by limited liability companies, of which Sunset is a partner. Am I right?
That is correct, with the exception of the service center, which is
Okay.
owned outright by Sunset Development Company.
Right. So that's one parcel out of 700 that Sunset owns. Now, Sunset doesn't own the property where their Toyota warehouse is located.
That is correct. That is
Okay,
owned by
and
Toyota.
I could go through the list that's on that exhibit, and they're not owned by Sunset, excuse me.
But you have notified them.
Yes, all property owners have been notified of this request. And this is very, I don't want to belabor this point. So if the chair wishes to move on to the next point, we can certainly do that.
Well, and not to belabor it, but the fact that other property owners were given notice of a proceeding doesn't equate to the property owners joining in this petition, which is the requirement of our municipal code.
It is absolutely no different than the San Ramon Valley specific plan where we took a city initiated plan and notified the property owners for participation. Those did, some participated and others did not.
But no, that's the point that you're wrong on, is that for our general plan and specific plans, it was a city-initiated operation. The city was the applicant, so the city didn't need anybody else to join in the petition. It gave notice to the other property owners, but the city was the proper applicant. In this situation, the applicant is a private individual who doesn't have any of the other property owners join in it, nor is the city an applicant as well.
Okay, moving on. So noted.
Well, could we have a ruling on leaving in or out those various
Right.
property owners?
This
We should create a record for the city council.
Okay, I would say that we can defer this to the city attorney. I'm at a loss here, so help
The city
me.
attorney has reviewed the resolution. I think Ms. D's suggestion is probably a very good suggestion, and we can make that modification for the commission.
And the modification being,
Applicant semicolon, sunset development, property owner semicolon, various.
okay,
Thank you.
all right. Page 17.
Oh, we're not done with 16. The bottom of page 16, there's a whereas that goes on to the top of page 17. And this refers to the zoning administrator, quote, expanding the scope of the FAR amendment to apply to the entire DMU land use, close quote. The only application we have in front of us was initiated by Sunset. It was never expanded thereafter by any action of anybody. There is no evidence that the zoning administrator, even though this was asked for, did anything to expand any part of this application. Because there's no evidence of this, documentary or otherwise, that sentence does not belong in this finding. There is no evidence upon which we could base this finding. Now, if the position of the commission is that Sunset is eligible to present and process this petition notwithstanding its status, then that sentence is also irrelevant. I would take it out.
I have a question. Are zoning administrative hearings public hearings that are open?
A zoning administrator does hold notice public hearings. However, as a zoning administrator, we do make administrative decisions.
Okay,
Yeah.
and is this an administrative decision
Yes,
that
it is.
didn't?
Well, it's basically when we receive the application and they're to ensure that, see, Sunset's parcels or a few parcels and a handful of a larger group, right? And so you just can't spot zone. And so in order to avoid the spot zoning and have, a handful of parcels have a different FAR, the appropriate thing is to include all parcels in that district to ensure that there's horizontal and vertical consistency amongst the district. And so
Okay.
that was the decision that was made.
All right, so let me, since we brought this up, since it's been opened up, let me ask a question. Is what happened is that Sunset came to the city and said that they wanted to rezone or have a general plan amendment for the 12 parcels that they owned, in quotes, in DMU North. And the planning department told Sunset that that would amount to spot zoning because it only involved a few of the parcels in DMU North, and that the appropriate way to proceed to get the general plan amendment they wanted was to file an application that covered the entirety of DMU North and then thus avoid this spot zoning issue.
It was the city staff who expanded the boundary to include the various parcels, and the city staff who created the map that's being presented to the commission tonight for the DMU North Zone.
And they expanded the boundaries of an existing application?
Yes, we did, to ensure vertical and horizontal consistency within
Okay.
the district.
So prior to the application we saw tonight, there was another application that was filed that only
there was not.
included the 12 parcels?
No, there was not. They included their parcels. When it was filed, we expanded the scope of the application, which is our discretion.
Well, so I'm not clear as exactly what happened. Was there an application filed with the city to amend the general plan that only included the parcels owned by Sunset?
Yes, and that is what's before you. That specific application we added the additional parcels with the DM within that zone to have horizontal and vertical consistency.
When you say you added that, the application says DMU North, it's signed by Sunset. That's the only person who signed off on it. Where did this alleged expansion occur?
I'm not going to get into, basically the application was submitted. As staff, we took on our own the authority to say we are going to include the entire district in this request. Eric, there's no other, I'm not sure what I can give you besides what I am telling you is what happened. I've answered your question that you've asked of me, and I think the commission is satisfied with my answer.
Well, we could probably spend a few more minutes on this, but I don't think that it's worth doing. We think we've created a record. I just will know for the record that I asked for the documentation dealing with this whole expansion episode and I received nothing. And that's in the record in Exhibit 2.
Noted. Okay. Now, page 17. Okay. Any objections to what is included on page 17? Any adjustments, the phrasing? Okay, hearing none. Page 18.
There's a section that deals with that's entitled, quote, regarding tribal consultation, close quote. There has been no mention of these activities in any of the staff reports. There's been no documentation provided for this, even though there's only a few instances that the resolution refers to. And I think it's improper for us as a commission to be verifying facts that we neither have seen nor been told about in any of the staff reports. Unless it's required to have this information on here, and even if it were, I still would say that it should be taken out. But I think this unsupported alleged fact should be taken out of our resolution.
Is this required?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Well, I think at some point we have to abide by good faith that this planning staff is following the law and they are giving us resolutions that are factually and I don't want to say legally because I'm over my skis here, but accurate according to the required statements. Is that fair enough to say, Ms. Yee?
That's correct. With any general plan amendment, we are always obligated under state law to send notices to tribes and to consult with them. We've never provided, other than in the resolution, the outcome of that consultation. Oftentimes that consultation can have sensitive information about artifacts and other things that are required not to be disclosed specifically. We only report out the results of the consultation.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a comment on that. For my own knowledge, does the city usually, because they usually give you mitigation measures to incorporate, and those are like conditions of approval. But from what I can see here, it's just monitoring in the event of earthwork activity on the project. So I'm assuming they're going to have like someone present on site during grading activities is what they've requested.
Typically, that's most of the comments that we receive from tribal consultations is for monitoring if there is earthwork disturbance associated with the project.
But I just want to clarify that there was nothing out of the ordinary, just that boilerplate.
That's correct.
Okay.
Through the chair, also the general plan, EIR, and mitigation measures adopted citywide also include provisions for Native American monitoring.
Yeah.
And cultural resources.
Yep, it's pretty standard.
Even I know that one. Okay. Page 19. Resolving zoning ordinance text amendments. And getting down to our independent judgment. Okay, hearing none. Last page. Okay. Okay. So we have amended the titling of applicants and property owners. And we're ready to vote. We have a motion and we have a second.
Just wanted to make sure.
Actually, if you would just amend the motion as amended. Thank you.
Had amended, guys, this for the change to the.
So the motion is 4 yes and 1 no. And so that will then move it on to the city council. Thank you very much. Okay, let me go back to my agenda here. Sorry. I think we're about the end. All right. Apologies. Okay, back to item number 9, public hearing new items. There are none. Item 10, non-public hearing action items. There are none. Item 11, study session, commissioner liaison reports, and interest items, staff report. Commissioners, do anybody have reports from your various committees?
I do. Last week, the ARB reviewed the Eden Housing Project. They provided a number of recommendations and suggestions that the applicant will evaluate and working with city staff to make final determination on the suggestions that the ARB made and whether they can incorporate them or not. So that was Eden Housing.
Okay, very good. Commissioner Curtis?
The TAC meeting was canceled, so I have none at this point.
Okay. Open space?
Yesterday, I went to the Open Space Committee meeting. We had a presentation by the head planner for the county of Contra Costa. The most interesting thing related to our city is that there are 19 cities in Contra Costa County. 16 of them have adopted the county's urban limit line as their urban growth boundary. Adoption of an urban growth boundary is required to get money back from the county under, I think it's Measure C, one of the Measure Cs. 3 of the cities have decided not to adopt the county's urban limit line: Pittsburgh, Antioch, and San Ramon. So what the county has decided to do, or at least let's put it this way, the planning staff at the county has decided to do, Lauren was there when he was there, and if I get it wrong, you can correct me. But what the county decided to do was to uniformly create a urban limit line, but the county's urban limit line will be for those 3 cities, at least for the city of San Ramon, will be coextensive with ours. So now we not only have our urban growth boundary, we are now this county's urban limit line. And the purpose of that was there are differences, as you know, between our line and the county's currently. So sometimes, I won't say they're turf wars, but sometimes issues come up about property sort of in between. And the county decided to make it uniformly to adopt our line. So anything that's in an urban growth boundary will be handled by the city as opposed to the county.
Excellent. Sounds like a good development, good process. Thank you. And I know the Parks Commission met, but I do not have a report, so I apologize. Staff news from you?
Yes, April 1st meeting will likely be canceled.
April Fools?
April Fools, yeah. And we're still working on a few other scheduling for the next several meetings, so we'll be getting back to you on that.
Okay.
The likelihood percentage.
Of April 1st,
100%. Likely, it is.
You're off the hook,
Yes.
Vice Chair. Okay, anything else, for the good of the order? All right, so we will adjourn at 8:28. Thank you, everyone.